Okay, this lecture is going to be very brief, but it's going to talk about what a scripting language is and some characteristics of scripting languages, because Python, which we'll be covering in this class, is classified as a scripting language. So, like I said, the first thing we want to talk about is some of the characteristics. And one of the primary ones is that when you're using a scripting language, your code is not compiled into an executable like would be the case with a language like C++, for example. Typically, they're interpreted line by line. And what that means is, let's say we have a Python program that has 2 lines of Python code, followed by a for loop that has 10 lines of code in it that, let's say, is going to be executed 100,000 times. So what happens is when Python starts running this program, it'll read the first line and interpret it to figure out what to do and then process that line. It would then read the second line of code, interpret it, decide what needs to be done, and do that. Then it would hit the for loop. So it would interpret the conditions of the for loop, and then it would interpret and process whatever I said, the 10 lines of code that are inside that loop. And then when it goes to the next iteration of the loop, it would have to interpret and process the 10 lines again. So it would be interpreting the same set of lines over and over again till the loop terminated. Now, Python and some other scripting languages are not strictly interpreted line by line. In the case of Python, it is converted into bytecode, and then that bytecode is executed on a process running on your machine called the Python virtual machine. So why do we convert it to bytecode and then execute it on a virtual machine? Well, one of the main reasons is for faster overall execution. When we were in that for loop executing 100,000 times, and we keep reinterpreting the same 10 lines over and over and over again, that's not very efficient. It's going to take time. So by interpreting those at runtime, when the program first starts executing, that's going to make the overall execution faster by faster. The other major reason is you can check for errors before execution begins. So in the scenario I gave you, it would be possible to get in that for loop, execute that for loop 90,000 times, and then get a runtime error. Because some line of code, let's say, is in an if statement, hadn't been interpreted before, and it contains some type of error. So you would have wasted all of your time, all the computing time, executing that loop 90,000 times just to find out that you have some type of error in your code. So that's the other big advantage of scripting languages. Now, like I said, we're talking primarily about Python, but there are other scripting languages out there. One that was popular for a number of years, primary language that I used because it was really good for Unix system administration and general programming, is Perl. I used to teach an intro to Perl and an advanced Perl classes at BCTC. Another very popular language is JavaScript. This is typically embedded into HTML pages to give web pages interactivity and decision-making capabilities. There's another language that's popular in the web environment called PHP. When PHP came out, it originally stood for personal home pages. But they have changed the name and say that PHP now stands for Hypertext Preprocessor, although I don't think the acronym matches up very well with that. Another language that was popular maybe in the early 2000s was Ruby. The person that created Ruby said he wanted to create the language because he wanted to increase programmer productivity and because programming should be fun. So supposedly Ruby, at least according to the creator, is a fun language to program in. I never really liked Ruby or Ruby on Rails personally, but there were a lot of people out there that did like it. One of the more popular scripting languages is Java. It's been around for a while. Very similar to Python. When the program starts up, it converts the Java code into bytecode, and then that bytecode is executed on the JVM, the Java virtual machine. So very similar to what I described with Python. A newer Microsoft language in the Windows world and the Azure cloud environment is PowerShell. PowerShell is a scripting language. An older language that I had programmed quite a bit in the past was AppleScript. This is for Mac OS machines, and it is a scripting language that allows you to easily interact with applications running on your Apple machine and or the Mac OS operating system. Really handy language. This is by no means an all-inclusive language. There are other scripting languages out there, but I was just trying to hit the ones that were more popular. So that ends up the discussion on scripting languages.